Okay, kids, in this video, we are going to take a look at how the subjunctive is used, the theory behind it. Of all the videos, this one will be the most complex for you to understand, especially at the beginning, not having any prior knowledge of the subjunctive. So bear with this, understand as much as you can, and once we get into the practical implementation of the subjunctive using various examples, a lot of this will make more sense. So, let's begin with the idea that the subjunctive is used in three different types of clauses, and I'll explain what a clause is in a moment. Those three types of clauses are nominal clauses, which is noun clauses, so describing a noun, adverbial clauses, and adjectival clauses, and we will take them in that order. Nominal first, then adverbial, then adjectival, and there'll be separate videos on each one of those types of clauses. So, to broaden your understanding in a general sense, there are two main moods in Spanish, two main types of verbs. We have the indicative, which is the tenses you already know. The indicative would be the present tense, the preterite, the imperfect, the future, and the conditional. And then we have a mood called the subjunctive, and that would be the present subjunctive or the imperfect subjunctive, which you've learned how to conjugate in the previous two videos. The indicative relates something that is considered to be definite or factual, whereas the subjunctive mood expresses emotions, judgment, or uncertainty. And we will break that definition down in much more detail as we move forward. But that's the basic difference between the two moods we have in Spanish, the indicative and the subjunctive. And what we're going to be focusing on in this video is when does the subjunctive come up and how do we know that we're supposed to use it? In sentences that have the subjunctive in it, they will all have the following structure to it. They will have a first clause, so the first part of the sentence, the word "que," and then the second part of the sentence. In the sentences that you're going to be dealing with, you're going to be asked to conjugate a verb here in the second part of the sentence. And it's going to be your job to decide if the verb that's in the second clause, the second part of this sentence, is in the subjunctive tense or the indicative tense. And everything we're going to do is going to show us how to know whether we want to use an indicative verb or a subjunctive verb. So, the first clause of the sentence is also known as the independent clause, meaning it can function by itself. And in that first part of the sentence, you're going to see a verb in the indicative tense, meaning the verb that's in the first clause will either be in the present tense, the preterite tense, the imperfect, the future, or the conditional. The word "que" is very important because that will separate the two clauses. That way you can identify everything that comes before the "que" is in the independent clause, and everything that comes after the "que" is the second clause, which is also known as the dependent clause. Dependent is a very good word to describe this clause because whether or not we use the subjunctive or the indicative in the second clause depends upon what the first clause says. So all the sentences we're going to be doing, you have to understand contextually. The first clause, or the independent clause, will say something. And depending on what it says, it will tell us whether we need to use the subjunctive or the indicative in the second clause. And future videos will explore, well, what does the first clause have to be about that tells us we need the subjunctive? So again, all subjunctive sentences will have the first or independent clause in one of these tenses, the word "que" in the middle, that's the relator, and then the second clause or the dependent clause, which is where the subjunctive will go if we're going to use it. Now, if we make a determination, and again, we'll explain that later on, that we need to use the subjunctive in the second or dependent clause, the question becomes, which one of the two subjunctives do you need? So, we're going to use something called the sequence of tenses, which is this chart that you see in front of you. If you make the determination that you're going to use the subjunctive, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the first clause. If the verb that's in the first clause is either the present tense or the future tense, then you will use the present subjunctive. If in the first clause the verb is in the preterite, the imperfect, or the conditional, then you will use the imperfect or the past subjunctive. Again, if you make the determination, and I will show you how later, that you need the subjunctive in the second clause, if the first clause is in the present or the future, use the present subjunctive, and if it's in the preterite, imperfect, or conditional, then you're going to use the imperfect subjunctive. This is called the sequence of tenses. Now, we're going to start with the nominal clauses, and there'll be a separate video on a breakdown of all the nominal clauses. But nominal clauses are verbs that follow the acronym WEDDING. W for wishes, wills, and wants, E for emotions, D for doubt, the other D for disbelief, I for impersonal expressions, N for negation, also known as denial, and G for God. And again, there'll be separate videos that break these individual letters down for you so you can see exactly what types of verbs fall into these categories. But the idea here is that if the first clause, the independent clause, has something to do with wedding, in other words, it shows a wish or will or want or emotion, doubt, disbelief, etc., then that is an indicator to us that we need to use the subjunctive in the second clause. So again, if the first clause shows us something from wedding, and I'll break that down in another video for you, then that is an indicator to us that we need to use the subjunctive in the second clause. Every time we do a subjunctive question, in other words, you're going to be filling in a blank in the second clause, you need to go through these 4 essential questions every time you do it. And if you do these questions correctly, you will always get the answer correct. So the way these questions work are, they're yes or no questions. If you answer yes, you may go on to the next question. If the answer is no, you stop the process of the questions and you follow the instructions for answering no. The questions must be asked in the order they're written, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you ask them out of sequence, it'll throw things off. So questions 1, 2, and 3, if you answer all of them as yes, that is an indication you must use the subjunctive in the second clause. Once you get to question 4, that will tell you what type of subjunctive you need to use. So here are your 4 essential questions. Again, you must answer yes to move on, and if you get all the way to the end of the questions, that tells you you're going to be using subjunctive. So, the first question is, do I have a subjunctive setup? In other words, is the verb in the first clause, the first part of the sentence, does it have something to do with wedding? Is it showing a wish or a will or an emotion or a doubt or disbelief or negation or an impersonal expression? Does that verb in the first clause have anything to do with wedding? And again, we will break wedding down in a future video for you. If the answer is yes, move to question 2. If the answer is no, that means the verb that you need to conjugate in the second part of the sentence will be in the indicative. Question 2, do I have a K? Is the word K there splitting the 2 clauses for you? If the answer is yes, move to question 3. If the answer is no, you're going to conjugate the verb in the infinitive. Just leave it alone. I'll do an example of that in a future slide. 3, do I have a subject change between clause 1 and clause 2? In other words, the subject of the verb in the first clause must be different than the subject of the verb in the second clause. Again, the first clause is everything before the K, the second clause is everything after the K. So you need something like a yo and a tu, or nosotros and an ellos. You need 2 different subjects. If the answer is yes, you may move to question 4. If the answer is no, put the verb that you need to conjugate in the indicative. Once we get through question 1, 2, and 3, and they're all yes, that is an indicator to us that we need to use the subjunctive. So question 4 is, what tense is the first clause in? And that's where we use our sequence of tenses. If the verb in the first clause is present or future, we use the present subjunctive. And if it's in preterite, imperfect, or conditional, we're going to use the past subjunctive. But once you go yes, yes, yes to questions 1, 2, and 3, now we need to use the subjunctive. And the sequence of tenses, that chart will tell us what subjunctive we need to use. What I'd like you to do is to try these examples, go through the 4 essential questions for each one, see if you need subjunctive or not, and then try to conjugate the verbs appropriately. Then you can check your answers. So pause the video. Alright, so let's take a look at these. Number 1, do I have a subjunctive setup? Do I have something from wedding? Yes, I have an emotion. I'm happy that. Do I have a K? Yes, I do. So that's question 1. Question 2. Do I have a subject change? I have yo, and then I have to. So I have a subject change. So now that brings me to question 4. Now I know I need the subjunctive. What tense is the first part of the sentence in? It's in present. So now I need present subjunctive. Go to the yo, drop the yo, add the opposite endings. Passes. In question 2, do I have a subjunctive setup? Do I have something from wedding? Yes, a doubt. Do I have a K? Yes, I do. Do I have 2 different subjects? Yes, I do. So there's questions 1, 2, and 3. That once I get past that, I know I need subjunctive. What tense is the first part of the sentence in? This is in present tense, so we need present subjunctive. Go to the yo, tango, drop the yo, add the opposite ending, tanga. Question 3, do I have a subjunctive setup? Yes, we have a wish, a will, or a want, preferir. Do I have a K? No, I do not. So I stop my process, the questions are done. If I do not have a K, we leave the verb in the infinitive, ear. They preferred to go to the zoo on Fridays. 1, I'm happy that you passed the exam. You doubt that she has a seal in her house.